Before we start, I need to let you know that this story touches on sensitive topics, including complicated family dynamics, blurred boundaries, and secrecy. If themes like emotional entanglement and betrayal make you uncomfortable, this may not be the story for you. You know that feeling, the way the air shifts when you walk into a place, the magnetic pull of something you can't explain but can't resist? That's exactly how it felt the day I returned to my grandfather Weston Carter's house. 2 weeks. 14 days spent with my parents, pretending my life was perfectly normal. I smiled through dinners, told them school was great, and dodged questions about dating. My mom's over-the-shoulder glances at my outfits and my dad's polite, distant nods were subtle reminders that I didn't quite belong there anymore. Not like I used to. But when the cab pulled up in front of Weston's house, I felt it. A strange mix of relief and nerves. This wasn't just coming home. It was more complicated than that. I stepped out, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from my white sundress, the kind that flutters just enough to turn heads. It was too short for family dinners, too fitted to feel casual. That was the point. I wanted him to notice me. The AC repairman's truck was still in the driveway. I didn't think much of it until the front door swung open, and Weston appeared, talking to a man in coveralls. The repairman slung his toolbox over his shoulder, his eyes landing on me for half a second too long. His smile was polite but curious. I barely acknowledged him, stepping past as Weston's voice pulled me in before I even crossed the threshold. "There's my girl." Like I had been gone for months instead of days. He didn't hug me, but he stood close enough that I caught the scent of his aftershave. My heartbeat stuttered, and I hated that it did. "Did you get everything fixed?" I asked, glancing toward the air conditioner, trying to sound casual. But my voice came out lighter than I intended. "Yep," Weston said. But he wasn't looking at the AC. His eyes locked onto mine, then dipped to the neckline of my dress before snapping back up. "Easy," he murmured. Soft. Almost like a warning. I felt it everywhere. The repairman cleared his throat, a reminder that we weren't alone. Weston stepped back just enough to let him pass, but not enough to break the tension. "Let me grab my toolbox," the repairman said, disappearing down the hall. I exhaled, realizing I had been holding my breath. Weston's gaze lingered for a second longer before he reached for my suitcase. "Leave it," I said quickly. "You can unpack later," he replied, setting it down without argument. I followed him into the living room, where the curtains were half-drawn, letting the afternoon light spill across the sofa. The house felt too quiet, like it had been holding its breath while I was gone. Weston settled onto the couch, and I perched on the armrest, smoothing the hem of my dress out of habit. I saw his eyes track the movement. It wasn't the first time I'd caught him looking. I had noticed it months ago. First I brushed it off. A glance here. A harmless comment there. But harmless didn't explain the way he was looking at me now. Like he wanted me to notice. And I did. I had noticed ever since I moved in. Since I started borrowing his sweaters when the nights got too cold. Since he left notes in my lunch bag, little reminders like I was still in middle school. Since the way he touched my arm lingered a second too long when passing me in the kitchen. It had started slow, small things I could ignore. Until I didn't want to ignore them anymore. I told myself it was because he made me feel safe. Because he had taken me in, given me a place to focus on school. Never complaining when I needed help. Maybe I owed him more than gratitude. Maybe I liked the attention. That thought hit harder than I wanted to admit. I looked away, pretending to fiddle with the straps of my purse. "So," I said, "what did you do while I was gone?" Weston's smile softened. "Counted down the days." I laughed, but it felt shaky. He didn't. The sound of footsteps broke the moment. The repairman reappeared, toolbox in hand. "Thanks for waiting," he said. "I'll let myself out." Weston stood and followed him to the door. I scrolled through my phone, pretending not to listen. But I was listening. The repairman said something I couldn't quite make out, and Weston laughed. A deep, easy sound that made people like him instantly. Then the door clicked shut. Weston returned, his face unreadable. "Looks like we've got the place to ourselves," he said. It wasn't the words that got me. It was the way he said them. Like we were in on something no one else could understand. I swallowed hard and stood, trying to shake the weight pressing down on me. I should unpack. Weston stepped aside, but not far enough. As I passed, his hand brushed mine. I told myself it wasn't intentional. I knew it was. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I was halfway down the hall headed to my room when I heard Weston's voice from the front porch. "She's coming back today." There was something in his tone, something that made my stomach tighten. Gotta make sure the place is perfect for her. I froze, my fingers tightening around the handle of my suitcase. But I didn't move. Another voice, Sterling's. The repairman. "Right." Weston responded too quickly. Too rehearsed. "She's been visiting her parents. Just finished her finals." Smart kid. I should have walked away. But I didn't. Maybe it was the way Weston said it, like he was proud. But there was something else beneath the words. Something that made my skin crawl. Sterling didn't respond right away. I pictured him nodding, thinking it over, deciding whether to push further. "That's nice," he finally said. But there was something in his voice, a shift. Like this wasn't just small talk anymore. I took a slow step back, trying to disappear into my room before I was noticed. But as I turned, the front door creaked open. Sterling stepped inside, toolbox in hand. His eyes landed on me. For a second, neither of us spoke. His gaze flicked, just briefly, to my dress, still slightly wrinkled from sitting on the couch. Then Weston stepped in behind him. And the moment passed. "You'll have to excuse her," Weston said, laughing, that easy, charming laugh of his. "Long flight." Sterling didn't laugh. He only nodded. But his eyes lingered, just long enough to make me wonder what he saw. Sterling's eyes flickered just for a second, before he nodded and walked past me. But as he did, I caught it. A smirk. Not friendly. Not polite. Just knowing. And that scared me more than I wanted to admit. The door shut behind him, but the sound was louder than it should have been. Like it had sealed something in instead of keeping something out. Weston didn't move right away. He stood by the window, peeking through the curtain as Sterling's truck rumbled down the driveway. I stayed frozen in the middle of the living room, still clutching the handle of my suitcase even though my arm ached from holding it too long. I expected him to say something about Sterling, maybe crack a joke to brush off the tension I knew we both felt. But when Weston finally turned, he didn't look at the door. He looked at me. And he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The heat in my chest flared up so fast it caught me off guard and I had to look away. My fingers fumbled with the buckle of my bag. Anything to break the moment before it went too far. "I should unpack," I muttered, not looking at him. I moved toward the hallway. But before I could leave, I felt it. His hand brushing against my arm. Soft. Quick. Like he wasn't sure if he should touch me. Like he wasn't sure if I'd pull away. I didn't. And that was the problem. I never did. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't like this was the first time. I could still remember the first time. It was months ago, just after I moved in. I was sitting at the kitchen table, stressed over a paper that refused to come together. Weston had come up behind me, resting his hands on my shoulders, rubbing slow circles to help me relax. That's all it was. At least that's what I thought. But then, just for a second, his hands drifted lower. I froze. And just as quickly he pulled back. "Sorry," he'd said, laughing it off. "You're just so tense." And I let it go. Because he had been there when no one else was. When I didn't know how I was going to afford rent. And my parents told me moving home wasn't an option. When I broke up with my boyfriend and spent 2 days crying. And Weston was the one who brought me soup and sat with me until I felt human again. I let it go when he started complimenting me more. Telling me how beautiful I looked, how mature I had become, how proud he was of me. I let it go when he started sitting closer on the couch. I let it go when he kissed my forehead one night, then my cheek, and lingered just a little too long. Because it felt good. Because no one had looked at me like that in a long time. And because part of me didn't believe it was wrong. Until it was too late. I snapped back to the present when Weston's hand slid down to my wrist. Not tight. Just enough to make me stop. "You don't have to rush," he murmured, his voice low. "We've got time." I swallowed hard. I knew I should pull away. I should have stepped back, picked up my bag and put space between us. But instead I stood there, feeling that same pull I had felt the first time I let him cross the line. And the worst part? I wanted him to. Before we dive into this part of the story, if you're still here and completely locked in, Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps keep these stories coming. Now let's get back to it. Weston sat back on the couch, stretching out like he didn't have a care in the world. But I knew better. The way his eyes followed me as I moved around the room gave him away. I pretended to organize my things, folding clothes that didn't need folding, smoothing out wrinkles that weren't really there. Anything to keep my hands busy. But Weston wasn't having it. "Come sit down," he said, patting the cushion next to him. "You've been gone too long for all this." I hesitated. My pulse jumped. I told myself it was nothing, just nerves. But the weight of his words made my feet feel heavier as I crossed the room. I didn't sit right next to him. Not at first. But Weston reached out, tugging me closer. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. His arm draped across the back of the couch, fingers brushing my shoulder. "You look different," he said. His eyes dipped lower, then back up. I swallowed. Different how? More grown up. His voice dropped. Beautiful. The word hung in the air, heavier than it should have been. I forced a laugh, but it cracked. I was only gone 2 weeks. Felt longer. His hand grazed my shoulder again, this time trailing down to the strap of my dress. He caught it between his fingers, straightened it, like it needed adjusting. My breath caught. It was nothing, just fixing a strap. That's what I told myself. That's what I wanted to believe. But it didn't feel like nothing. Weston tilted his head, watching me too closely. "I missed you," he said softly. I didn't know what to say to that. Or maybe I did. But I was too afraid to say it out loud. Before I could figure it out, the front door swung open. It wasn't loud, but it hit me like a gunshot. I jerked back so fast my dress strap slipped down my arm. Weston tensed beside me, but he didn't move. And there was Sterling standing in the doorway, toolbox in one hand. Something unreadable in his expression. For a second no one spoke. Sterling's dark eyes flicked between us. The loose strap on my shoulder. Weston's hand still too close. The flesh in my cheeks I couldn't hide. His brows knit together. And I knew. He saw it. Whatever this was. Whatever I had been trying to pretend wasn't happening. He saw it. Sterling shifted his weight, clearing his throat, like that might make this less awkward. "Sorry," he said, lifting the toolbox. "Left this behind." Weston finally moved. Stood up. Stepped between us like he could physically block whatever Sterling was thinking. "No problem," he said too casually. "Glad you caught it before you left." But Sterling didn't look at him. He looked at me. It wasn't judgment in his eyes. Not exactly. It was worse. It was recognition. Like he knew what was happening, but wasn't sure if he wanted to believe it. My heart pounded. I wanted to explain, to brush it off, to make him look away. But the words stuck. Sterling lingered, like he was waiting for one of us to crack. Then finally, he took a step back. "Well," he said, "hope you enjoy the rest of your day." The way he said it made my stomach twist. Like it wasn't just small talk. Like it was a warning. But the worst part? It worked. The knot in my stomach loosened just a little, and my breathing slowed. Weston saw it happen. His voice softened. "You're safe," he told me. "You're always safe." I let out a shaky breath, leaning into his touch without meaning to. It wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it. Like he would do anything to protect me. Like I mattered more than anyone else ever had. And that's what scared me the most. Because as much as I wanted to pull away, I didn't. I couldn't. The sound of my phone vibrating jolted me out of it. I grabbed it off the coffee table and saw my mom's name flashing across the screen. I froze. Weston's eyes flicked to the phone, then back to me. "Answer it." I hesitated but swiped to accept the call. "Hey, Mom." Her voice came through sharp and concerned. "You made it back okay?" "Yeah," I said quickly. Too quickly. "Got here a couple of hours ago." There was a pause. "You sound off." I forced a laugh. "I'm just tired from the flight, that's all." Another pause. Longer this time. "Are you sure?" she asked. Because I was thinking about something earlier. And maybe it's nothing, but... She trailed off. My throat went dry. "But what?" Mom exhaled. "I don't know. It's just... Dad and I were talking about Grandpa earlier. And I know you two have gotten close since you moved in, but… She hesitated. I worry about how much you're leaning on him. I stiffened. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing bad, she said quickly. I just mean, he's always had a way of making people depend on him. And sometimes that's not healthy. I felt Weston's eyes on me. I turned away, pressing the phone tighter to my ear. I'm fine, I said. We're fine. You're sure? Mom's voice softened. Because if you ever need to come home, the door's always open. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I know. The words felt heavier than they should have. We said goodbye and I put the phone down, my hands trembling. Weston reached out, brushing my hair back from my face. What did she want? I shook my head. Nothing. He didn't press. But the look in his eyes told me he didn't believe me. And as much as I wanted to convince myself I was still in control, I could feel it slipping away. I was in the kitchen when I heard the knock. It wasn't loud, but it made me jump anyway. My stomach sank before I even turned around. Weston wasn't home. He had gone to pick up groceries, which meant I was alone. 3 quick knocks. Sharper this time, like whoever was out there wasn't planning to leave. I forced myself to the door and opened it just enough to see who it was. Sterling. He stood there, toolbox in hand, but something about his expression made my chest tighten. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't even pretending to be casual. Sorry to bother you, he said, but his voice was flat. Just need to finish up a few things with the unit. I wanted to tell him no. That now wasn't a good time. But my words wouldn't come out. Instead, I stepped aside. He brushed past me without waiting for an invitation. He set his toolbox down and crouched near the vent, fiddling with the screws. But his eyes kept flicking up at me. And the silence stretched. Until it felt unbearable. You okay? He asked finally, not looking at me this time. I froze. What? He tightened one of the screws, his jaw tense. You just seem, I don't know, nervous. I forced a laugh, but it sounded thin. I'm fine. He looked up then, really looked at me, and suddenly I felt like I couldn't breathe. You sure? He asked. And there it was, the question hanging between us, the one he wasn't really asking out loud, but was begging me to answer. I swallowed hard and shifted my weight. It's just been a long week. Sterling didn't break eye contact. I get that, he said, but his tone made it clear. He didn't believe me. You know, if there's something you need to talk about, I'm here. I almost did it. I almost let everything spill out right there. But then, I thought about Weston, about his voice in my head. You're safe with me. No one would believe anything else. And I panicked. I stepped back, shaking my head. I'm good, I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. Really? Thanks though. Sterling's mouth opened like he wanted to push. But then, he closed it again. He nodded, muttering something about getting back to work, and turned away. But as he packed up his tools and walked out the door, I saw it in his face. He didn't believe me. That night I was on my bed scrolling through my phone, pretending I wasn't still replaying that conversation in my head, when my screen lit up with a call. Chubby. I almost ignored it, but part of me needed the distraction. So I answered. Hey, I said, trying to sound normal. Finally, Chubby said, half laughing. You've been impossible to reach. What's going on with you? My chest tightened again. Nothing. Just busy. Busy. Chubby scoffed. You ghosted me for 2 weeks. Don't give me that. I tried to laugh it off, but it fell flat. I'm serious. School, family. Everything's just been a lot. Chubby was quiet for a second, and I thought maybe I'd get away with it. But then, his voice softened. Is this about Weston? I froze. What? You heard me, Chubby said. You've been weird ever since you moved in with him. And don't say it's nothing because I know you, Emily. You're different. Jumpy. Like you're hiding something. The panic rose again, bubbling under my skin, until it felt like I might explode. I'm fine, I snapped. Too sharp. Too fast. Emily. I said I'm fine. The silence that followed was worse than anything he could have said. Tears stung my eyes, but I wouldn't let them fall. Not now. Look, I've got to go. I said. And I hung up before Chubby could say anything else. I dropped my phone on the bed, buried my face in my hands. I was unraveling. And the worst part? I didn't know how to stop it. Chubby's voice echoed in my head. I sat curled up on the couch, my legs tucked underneath me, pretending to scroll through my phone. But Weston noticed. He always noticed. "You're quiet," he said, not looking up from the TV. I forced a shrug. "Just tired." "Is that all?" His voice had shifted. Lower. Sharper. I hated how quickly it made my stomach flip. "Yeah," I said. But it didn't sound convincing. Not even to me. Weston muted the TV and turned to face me. His eyes locked onto mine, and suddenly the room felt too small. "Talk to me." I froze. "About what?" "You've been acting different ever since Sterling came back." I swallowed hard. "I'm fine." "Emily." He said my name like a warning, and something in me snapped. What if he told someone? The words came out before I could stop them. Weston's face darkened. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, staring at me so hard it felt like he could see straight through me. "He won't." "But what if he does?" My voice was rising now, shaky, panicked. "What if he already has? What if—" "Stop." I flinched. Weston stood up, crossing the room in 2 strides, towering over me. His presence was suffocating, but I couldn't look away. "Listen to me," he said, each word sharp and deliberate. "No one's going to believe him. Do you hear me? No one." I opened my mouth to argue, but he cut me off. "You think he's going to go around telling people he saw a girl sitting too close to her grandfather? That's all it was. That's all it looked like." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him, but the panic wouldn't let go. "What if?" "There is no what if." Weston's voice softened, but his eyes didn't. "I'm not going to let him ruin this for us." The way he said it, calm, steady, certain, made my chest tighten. I nodded, but it wasn't enough for him. He stepped closer. His hand brushed my arm, then gripped it, just a little too tight. "You trust me, don't you?" The words came out like a challenge. I swallowed hard, forced myself to meet his eyes. "Yes." And I hated myself for how easy the lie felt. But the night didn't end there. Hours later I was in bed, staring at the ceiling when my phone buzzed. I reached for it, my heart pounding. Chubby. I almost ignored it. But something inside me, guilt maybe, made me answer. "Emily." His voice was quieter this time. "What?" I whispered, keeping my voice low. "You need to tell me what's going on." I closed my eyes. "Nothing's going on." "Stop lying to me." I flinched. "You think I don't see it?" His voice broke. "You think I don't know what it looks like when someone's scared?" I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it out. "I can't talk about this right now." "You can't or you won't?" Tears burned my eyes, but I wouldn't let them fall. "Please," Chubby said. "Just let me help you." For half a second I almost did it. Almost let the words spill out. But then, Weston's voice came back in my head. Steady, certain, unshakable. "You trust me, don't you?" I couldn't do it.
"I'm fine," he whispered.
And I hung up. As I lay there in the dark, I knew I just made everything worse. Before we get into the final part of the story, I want to hear from you. What do you think Emily should do? Should she walk away for good? Or is there more to this story that hasn't been revealed yet? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story has kept you hooked so far, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's finish this. I stood in the doorway, suitcase in one hand, phone in the other. The air felt thick, every breath heavier than the last. Weston leaned against the wall, arms crossed. But he didn't look angry. Not this time. He looked scared. "Are you sure about this?" His voice was quiet, almost careful, like he thought the wrong words might shatter me. I wasn't sure. Not at all. But I nodded anyway. "It's just for a little while," I said, even though we both knew that wasn't true. He stepped closer, and for a second, I thought he was going to reach out to stop me, but he didn't. "I don't want you to go." And his voice cracked, just enough to make my stomach twist. I swallowed hard, gripping the handle of my suitcase tighter. "I have to." He nodded. But his eyes said something else. The silence stretched until it was too much. So I turned, walked out the door. Before I could change my mind, the cab ride felt longer than it should have. My phone buzzed a couple of times, but I didn't check it. I didn't want to know if it was Weston. When I finally made it to my parents' house, the place felt smaller than I remembered, like it didn't quite fit anymore. Mom hugged me at the door, but her eyes scanned my face the whole time, searching for something I wasn't ready to give her. Dad barely looked up from the TV. I went straight to my old room and shut the door, sat on the bed, and stared at my phone. Weston's name was still at the top of my texts, but that wasn't the one that made my chest tighten. It was Sterling's. The draft sat there, glaring at me. I had typed it 2 nights ago, when the panic was too much. It wasn't long, just a few words, asking if he could keep what he saw to himself. I hovered over the send button, heart pounding, but something stopped me. Sending it meant admitting there was something to hide. It meant giving him power. I couldn't do it. I hit delete, and the screen went blank. But the knot in my stomach didn't go away. I stared at the phone for a long time, half hoping it would buzz again, half hoping it wouldn't. And somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. What happens next? Does Emily stay away? Or does Weston pull her back in? Should Sterling step in? Or will Emily keep running from the truth? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep these stories going. I can't wait to hear what you all think.